3 viewers waiting. All right. Exciting. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Obviously, I'm just talking to you and then the computer as well, but just a reminder that the exam has gone live today. You have until, you can take the exam today if you want to, or you have until all the way till Tuesday by 11:30 p.m. to take the exam. Multiple choice, I believe it's 120 minutes you have to finish it, right? No extensions, no partial credit, no excuses for not taking the exam, right? So you have until today, all the way until Tuesday to finish the exams, but that is live for you to take. Exam one's on chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in my textbook, but it goes International Expansion of Cinema, before that, the Invention of Cinema, National Cinemas, Soviet Montage, and German Expressionism. Come on in, Kensei, how you doing? Oh, and it's Eddie.
There you go.
It's Eddie too, excellent. It adds energy to the classroom.
Yes, sir.
I like it. But I was just saying the exam is live today, right?
Yeah.
You can take it until, you have until Tuesday to finish the exam, Tuesday by 11:30 p.m., right? I highly recommend that you don't wait till the last minute to take it, right? Take it, take this weekend or whatever, it doesn't matter, but that way, if anything goes wrong, you have a little more time to finish it. But yeah, it's on International Expansion of Cinema, the Invention of Cinema, National Cinemas, the Soviet Cinema, and German Cinema in the 1920s. It's on those 5 chapters, and of course, it's divvied out on iCollege, divided into chapters. So it should be relatively easy to study through before you take the exam. But that is available for you. Don't forget to do that, essentially. Right? And this is for anyone watching. No partial credit, no extensions. Right? You have to make sure you complete that exam by Tuesday. Since there's 3 of you, I think we can do this now. All right. So, what are some of your favorite film soundtracks?
Ooh.
Yeah, go ahead, Eddie.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
That's a good one. That's a great example. What do you enjoy about that soundtrack?
Just how it's not my type of genre of music. When I saw the movie and I heard some of the soundtracks in the movie, it piqued my interest, and I ended up liking a lot of the songs on there.
Right, it definitely has sort of a feeling of like there's a lot of graffiti aesthetic to it, and the soundtrack sort of kind of goes along with that, sort of enhances it. Yeah. Any other soundtracks?
Oh, the Spider-Man soundtracks for like the Sam Raimi films.
Oh, yeah.
Those
Okay.
are great. I love them.
All right, great. What were you gonna say, Kensei?
Man of Steel.
Man of Steel, you enjoyed that
Oh,
one.
that's a good soundtrack. Yeah.
That's one of my favorites.
For me, like the Blade Runner soundtrack is one of my favorites of all time, and then of course Blade Runner 2049, I enjoyed that one as well. A film that you're not gonna know, Flash Gordon, is I enjoy that soundtrack, the Queen soundtrack, I enjoy that, but definitely my top choices. What were some limitations? So we're talking about this chapter, Introduction to Sound. And of course, this chapter is going to be the first chapter that's going to be exam 2. But what were some of the limitations to capturing sound during this time period? Eddie?
Mixing wasn't possible at the time, and you had to record the music and what was going on at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. If you were going to record sound during this time period, you had to quite literally capture the sound and the images together. So there was no mixing like you see today. Like you can't capture the sound and then mix it together. So when you were capturing the sound, and we'll talk about the 2 different ways you can capture sound. You were capturing both the sound and the images simultaneously, which makes editing very difficult, right? If you want to cut the scene between edits, that makes it very difficult because you're capturing the sound in there as well. What else did you say? You said something else. You said that you had to capture both at the same time. was kind of the same thing. Yeah, go ahead, Sawyer.
I was gonna say it's like the sound is omnidirectional, so like it would pick up everything on set. So I guess like if you tripped and fell, they would pick that up during the scene.
Right, and even more, uh, problematic is if you wanted sound, the sound actually had to be filmed with the images. So if you wanted a soundtrack, for example, you had to literally have a band, somewhere near the set playing music while the dialogue is happening, right? Which creates a lot of problems with, how loud the band's gonna be versus how loud the dialogue is. It puts a lot of limitations on what you can do in terms of the action. So you couldn't do a lot of action scenes. It had to be pretty much essentially stationary, some of these shots. So a lot of the early talkies is the way they called it. A lot of the early talkies are, point and shoot, because there's a lot of problems with, a lot of limitations on capturing sound, right? So omnidirectional is a great point that when they did have a microphone, everything was captured when you were filming. Great. Let's move on to the last question. Name a few contemporary examples of your favorite filmmakers incorporating sound in creative ways. So rather than just, like capturing dialogue or even just playing a musical score, what are some creative, like some contemporary films you can think of that use sound? Go ahead, Eddie.
There was a recent, it came out last year, but it wasn't as noticed. The film Just Mercy with Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx.
Okay.
So, spoiler alert, kind of, there's a death scene for one of the inmates, and the way that they made that scene was so intense, like I actually almost started crying.
Really?
Because of how good it was. They use sound, like people will actually use the mugs to hit the railings, or
Okay.
like, instead of using just music itself, they would literally use objects in the room. The chains of him walking to his death sentence, everybody shouting stay strong and all this and that. It was just, that entire sequence was just nothing but sound created by all the actors, which made his death so sad.
Nice, right. So you're sort of incorporating like organic sound into the soundtrack itself, right? Which, Blade Runner kind of does that. It uses like this industrial sort of like, you hear a lot of like train screeching tracks, and you hear like sirens and that sort of thing. Yeah. Sawyer?
Actually, since he talks about that, it reminded me of this movie. It's called The Green Mile.
Familiar?
How they use sound is especially during the electrocution scenes. They made it really sound like flesh, like your flesh was actually being fried. And sometimes they would cut away and not show that, but you just hear the sound, and then the person screaming. So you just imagine in your head, and it's far worse than what they actually showed on camera.
All right, great. Kinson, were you gonna say something?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with that about the Blade Runner soundtrack.
Okay, great.
When you talk about the sirens and the train sound, yeah.
And what we're going to see here is we're going to see a little bit of creativity using sound and like kind of an early adaptations of sound in the film. I'll show some examples. The famous example, or the one that I use a lot when I talk about incorporating sound, is, has anyone seen Reservoir Dogs? Have you seen that film? There's a pretty gruesome scene where one of the criminals is sort of torturing a cop that they capture. And it's pretty a gruesome torture scene, but in the scene, the criminal who's doing the torturing, he plays like a very upbeat song on the radio, and he's dancing around, and it's like this weird jarring, like upbeat, like 70s hit. I think it's Stuck in the Middle with You, like Stuck in the Middle with You. It's that song playing during a very gruesome torture scene. It creates this unsettling feeling.
Oh, that reminded me of American Psycho and like Huey Lewis in the News.
Oh yeah.
When he would use that.
And they even use Susu Studio, right? Yeah, good. All right, good. Let's talk about this. So a couple things. Let me get to my notes. Notes. Always like notes. All right. So like we kind of already mentioned, when like early adaptation of sound or the introduction of sound has some obvious limitations. The biggest limitation was just how, how ineffective the technology was. Omnidirectional mics that picked up everything in the scene. If you wanted to play a musical score, you had to literally tape the musical score along with the acting, right, which creates these situational problems. Didn't have a lot of say on any action scenes. You're kind of limited to and stuck in one spot. It was the adoption of sound was sort of embraced differently in different countries. The Great Depression had a lot to do with that. Mixing was not possible, had to be recorded together. But what I want to do before we start getting into the history of the introduction of sound, what I want to do is I want to show an example of how sound can be very powerful in a scene, and how changing the sound can completely change the affect, the emotions of a scene, or enhance the scene, augment the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a sound essay. This is a video essay that someone put together that I really enjoyed. And I think it, I already have it queued up. And I think it kind of shows what sound can do.
There are a few ways that you can build up tension in a movie scene. Through camera work, through pacing, and probably most commonly through music. Like the music you're hearing right now in this incredibly tense scene from Steven Spielberg's 2005 film, Munich. Except, there is no music in the scene. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up. We all know that movies have only two ways into your brain, through your eyes and through your ears. But if you've ever had the chance to edit a movie,
Some
or
film
short
scholars
film, or
don't
even
disagree
small
with this.
video,
They say you can
quickly
feel.
becomes apparent that when you're watching something, these two senses are weirdly interconnected. The visual side of film gets most of the attention because it's right in front of you, and it's usually what you remember after a movie is over. But in many ways, the visuals are simply the face of the operation, while the audio is actually the puppet master, the one that really holds the power. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Take a look at this scene right here. So what does Spielberg want you to pay attention to here? These people walking by and this car passing? No, it's not what Spielberg wants. It's what I want, since that was the sound design I just made for that shot. Here's what the actual shot sounds like. Besides being infinitely better, it's easy to notice how the sound really affects what you see and from what perspective you see it. In my version, the shot had an omniscient third-person point of view. In the real version, as soon as the audio starts, you're placed in a perspective. The first thing you hear is a conversation from street level, so even though the long lens is fixed on Eric Bana, you know the moment is taking place on the ground. Then to drive the point home, you hear Daniel Craig singing The Temptations, and the vocal recording is close, intimate, even though you never go inside the car. That's enough to put you there. Then the car that you're really supposed to pay attention to, the black one, parks, and the sound of it parking jumps out in the mix. Just like you wouldn't hear Daniel Craig in that way from where the camera is, you wouldn't hear the car that clearly, but the sound design picks these things out to tell a specific story. Steve, shut up. The point here is that in film, you really do see with your ears more than you think. And sound doesn't mind that image gets the credit, because a key to the power of sound design is its invisibility. If dialogue sounds close, then you are close to the person who's speaking it, wherever they are.
My brothers were killed, my papa and my sister were both hanged, and...
Okay, so back to this sequence. Oh, yeah, forgot. No music. This 4-minute and 50-second scene is without music and almost entirely wordless. How does Spielberg and legendary sound designer Ben Burtt, who gave the world this, How do they build the tension here? Well, Bert does it by building a bed of constant, noisy city ambience, then singling out and stringing together, like beads on a wire, key noises that tell the story. The background is that Eric Bana and his team are going to assassinate this man in his home by getting him to answer a phone that they've secretly installed a bomb in. The string of isolated plot sounds goes like this. The car with the assassins arrives. The dialogue of the target's wife and especially young daughter, then their car pulling away, signaling it's safe to move forward. Then the coins and rotary phone that will make the call. Then the priming of the detonator. And then, wait, what was that? The first moment of trouble comes in sound. Up until now, the isolated noises represent the steps of the plan going smoothly. The truck passing by represents a break in that chain and a hitch in the plan. At this point, the ambience outside starts to take on some strange qualities. There's a high-pitched whine, like a train stopping on top of everything. And just like the moving truck blocks the assassin's view, the mover's talking keeps them from hearing the daughter's car pull back up to the apartment. She plays a key part in the scene, so Bert isolates her again, but not her voice this time, her footsteps, which continue indoors. In the apartment, the ambience is quiet. And the really incredible thing about this scene is that Bert and Spielberg build the tension not by working toward a great crescendo of noise, but by gradually subtracting elements. Once the daughter is up here, the danger can be signaled by a single sound effect. The important elements have been set up so well by this point that you could follow the rest of the scene without seeing it at all.
Oh, wait, oh.
Non, c'est moi qui réponds. Allô? 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 Allô?
The climax of this scene, brilliant.
Football season is here.
Commercial, sorry.
So is the NFL Network on YouTube TV.
Add one or two.
Grammarly can help
Oh,
you write
come on.
quickly and confidently, so you never
Dylan.
have to slow down at work.
Is silence. But it's a silence that works so well because it anticipates the noise of an explosion to come. At this point, the ambience has become really impressionistic, and when it comes back in, it has echo and reverb. It's hurried footsteps and an anxious.
Alright, so that's a great example. I know it's kind of a long video here, but it's a great example of what sound can do, right? How it can enhance a scene and how it can actually sort of augment or even adapt the message that you're seeing, the visuals, right? Alright, so let's start with, it may be helpful to think of this time period or the introduction of sound with three different countries: the United States, the USSR or the Soviet Union, and Germany. All right, so let's start off with the United States. What is often considered to be the first film with sound in it, that captured sound, right? The first part talkie, as they call it, is The Jazz Singer in 1927. This film is a part talkie, part silent film. So there's intertitles and that sort of thing, but there's a couple of scenes where there is actual dialogue and music. Once again, this is considered to be the first film with sound, that recorded sound. It creates sort of a sensation. One of the actor in it is Al Jolson, kind of a big celebrity, a very talented singer, very popular singer. I should point out that this film has a scene with blackface in it. So Al Jolson wears blackface in one scene in this film, right? So once again, it's another example of how racism often ties in directly with popular films like Birth of a Nation and then now The Jazz Singer, right? So it's important to bring that up rather than just simply praising The Jazz Singer as the first film with sound in it. it's also important to bring up how problematic the film was as well. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show a clip from The Jazz Singer, 1927. Here it is. As you can see there, there's intertitles because the majority of the movie is a silent film.
Wonderful towns are always hard to find. Some folks have one, some folks have none. And I was alone for years, but fate was kind. And in the end, sent me a friend. Although he's not much higher than mine, still he's the greatest thing on earth for me. Dirty hands, dirty face, please forgive his face, but his smile is as cute as can be. Making noise, breaking toys, always fighting the boys. But his eyes, they're a vision to see. And when my work is done, coming home to the setting sun, from the gate he'll start to run, and then I'll kiss my boy. Dirty hands, dirty face, little devil, that's what they say. But to me, he's an angel of joy.
So initially, this film was supposed to be a silent film, and then they, obviously they kind of experimented with playing, having him sing during it. It's worth noting that the thing that audience seemed to really like was, yes, they enjoyed his songs, but, and I'll try to find a clip of it. In between his songs, he would sort of like improv, where he's sort of reacting to the crowd. And people really enjoyed that. Let me see if I can try to find that for you. But it's almost like he's hyping up the crowd. Let me see if I can find it. I might not be able to find it. I think this is it right here, actually.
You want to hear Good Good Fifty? All right, hold on. So listen, play Good Good Fifty, 3 choruses, you understand? In the 3rd chorus, I whistle. I'll give you a hard hand. Go right ahead.
When he takes a line in his mentor, and the second in which he improvises this exchange with his mother.
You like that, Mama? I'm glad of it. I'd rather please you than anybody I know of. Oh, darling, will you give me something? You'll never guess. Shut your eyes, Mama. Set them for little Jackie. Oh, I'm going to steal something. I'll give it back.
After this, the film slips back.
There you go. A little fun fact for you. All right, so that was The Jazz Singer, 1927. All right, so let's talk about the first implementation of recording sound with film. So Lee DeForest introduced his photofilm in 1923. It was a sound on film technique. So the sound on film technique, essentially, it captures both the visual and the audio. It converts the audio into a light stream, and the image and the sound are recorded together on the same film strip, right? That is the sound on film. The sound on disc is slightly different, right? So the Warner Brothers invented the Vitaphone. They used the sound on disc system. This system would record the sound and the images separately. And when you would project it, or when you would play the film, you would have the sound playing and the visual playing simultaneously. All right, so slightly different designs, essentially the same thing. You're capturing both the sound and the image together. But obviously this creates a little bit of a problem because movie theaters are wanting to have one universal system rather than having to adapt their theaters to both a sound on film and a sound on disc. So what ended up happening was what is often called the Big Five Agreement. MGM, Universal, First National, Paramount, and Producers Distributing Corporation signed the Big Five Agreement, pledging to adapt whatever, whether it was sound on film or sound on disc, whatever kind of won out, they would all agree to choose that and then adapt all theaters to be able to play the technology. So Western Electric had a sound on disc, and RCA had a sound on film. Western Electric would also create a sound on film version, but the Big Five chose Western Electric's system, the sound on disc. RCA's rejection system, the photofilm, many theaters bought out. Due to the Depression, many theaters could not afford sound equipment, and many films were released in both sound and silent versions. Let's see here. The very first, what we consider to be the very first all-talkie, so the Jazz Singer had sound in it, right? It recorded sound. But the first complete all-talkie was a film called The Lights on New York, or Lights of New York, in 1928. I'll play a clip from this.
Was that for the night, Jim? Yeah. And for all the business I did, I might as well have been closed up all day. You know, Eddie, we're wasting our time in a burg like this. Now, you take Kitty Lewis, for instance. She took a chance, went to New York City, and she's doing fine. Huh. Since they built that big hotel over there across the street, well, your hotel's not even making expenses. Why don't you have a customer in there for hours at a time? Most of the hicks in this town would like to cut their own hair. Well, I'm sick of this bird, too. Now, listen, I've been to New York enough to know that I belong someplace where I can do something. Well, me too. Do you know that I'm the best barber in this town? Yes. Now, you take those two fellas in room 21 that have been talking to us about going in business with them. They've got one of the best barber shops in New York City.
All right, that's Lights of New York, the first all-talkie. All right, moving along here, moving along. All right, so let's move to the USSR. All right, so the transition to sound came during the first 5-year plan, where we talked about the first 5-year plan last class. This happened in the last era, right? Where you sort of divide Soviet film in the 1920s by 3 distinct eras. This is the last part of that era. The Soviet Union was trying to expand the film industry. The Great Depression significantly slowed efforts. By the beginning of the Soviet entry into World War II, in 1941, the introduction of sound was still not complete. So filmmakers in the montage movement, remember we talked about the montage movement? The filmmakers in the montage movement were interested in the use of sound more than just duplicating what's on the screen, right? So rather than just implementing sound or dialogue, they were interested in how you could add extra layers or messages or emotions to a scene simply by playing with sound. And one way they did this is through contradictory sound. Can anyone guess what contradictory sound means?
Like opposite of what you're seeing on the screen.
Or you're seeing, you're hearing something that doesn't make sense with what you're seeing.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right, exactly. So what I want to do is I want to show an example of this. This is from a film called Alone. In this film, she's waiting for a phone booth to open up, and then we can put our film caps on here and kind of sort of talk about what this contradictory sound, what it actually does to this scene. But this is Alone.
Stop that beer. Hello. Hello, pardon. Hello. See? Тут пирожками. Великолепно. Какие? Яйцами? Хочешь, хочешь. А второе? Рагу. И комфорт. Это... Не знаю. Ну, как ты? Чего? А Лидочка? А няня? Целую. Да-да, целую. Пока. А? Да.
So that's a great example of contradictory sound. So what do you think? What does this do to a scene? How does this change the scene? How does it enhance the scene? What is it doing to the scene? Yeah.
I think it's adding like a little bit of, I felt at the end chaos because of all those voices, and you don't really know, you honestly don't really know what's going on, because in your mind you're thinking, wait, why am I not hearing what she's saying? Why am I hearing all this other stuff going around? So my guess is maybe it's to cause anxiety, panic, because at least on her face it looks like she's distressed.
Yeah, certainly, right? So I think we can assume simply by watching this without knowing the background of this film, is that she's anxious. She wants to get on the phone as fast as she can. Something is upsetting her. And then when we get into the phone booth, there's this weird change where we no longer hear what's inside the phone booth. We're hearing these outside sources, whatever it is, if it's the crowd noise or whatever. And it does sort of create this, like as you said, this chaotic feeling to it, this sense of anxiety, right? This feeling that would not have existed, or it would not have existed to this level without this sort of experimentation with what sound can do. Good. That was from Alone, 1931, a USSR film. Let's move on to Germany. So Tobis Klangfilm is two different sound companies that merged together. They were the first to attempt to use sound in film. They blocked the sale of U.S. equipment. Western Electric actually ended up having a settlement or agreement with Tobis Klangfilm, to where that Tobis Klangfilm would sell to Germany, Scandinavia, and most European countries, while the U.S. would sell to Canada, Australia, India, and the USSR. A noteworthy film, and I do want to show an extended clip from this film, is a film called M, 1931. Has anyone heard of this film? M. All right, so this is I keep saying the word noteworthy, but it most certainly is, right? There are people who believe this is the greatest film ever made. It is most certainly, like if you were to say the top 10 films that you need to watch if you want to be a film director, this is up there, this is in there, right? It's obviously a German film directed by Fritz Lang, who's filmed many noteworthy films, including Metropolis. But this film features, the plot of the film is centered around a child murderer, right? So he kidnaps children and murders them. He is a psychologically challenged individual, and one of the things that this film sort of uses a lot, and we still use today, is something called sound bridges. Does anyone know what a sound bridge is?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's where it's like you either could have sound from your next scene start playing in the scene concurrent with the scene, or sound from that scene still playing on to the next scene.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty standard in filmmaking today, right? It's using sound to connect scenes together. So for example, the famous Matrix, if you've seen the first Matrix film, she's whispering into Neo's ear in one scene, and you can start hearing the sound of an alarm clock going off, and then you see him wake up to the alarm, right? So that's a great example of a sound bridge. I do want to show a couple other great examples. These are sound bridges.
Ben, what are you doing?
Well, I would say that I'm just drifting here in the pool.
Why?
Well, it's very comfortable just to drift here.
I thought my jokes were bad.
You don't give a shit about anybody, and nobody gives a shit about you.
You can hear the sound of the door, right? It opens up and then it closes in the next scene. That sort of plays with the diegetic, non-diegetic line that we were talking about last class, right? And I want to show more examples of that here in a second. But what I want to do now is I want to show the opening sequence to the film M. Try to pay attention to the use of sound. There are several sound bridges in this film, but this is M.
gelernt habe, wie diese verdammte Melodie zu singen. Den ganzen Tag wollte sie in den Ohren. Als ob man nicht schon genug von dem Mörder zu hören kriegte.
Macht es doch. Solange man sie singen hört, auf jeden Fall wenigstens, hat er noch Pause.
Naja, hast du wieder recht.
Du hast aber einen schönen Ball. Wie heißt du denn?
Elvi Beckmann.
Ist Elsie nicht mitgekommen?
Nö, mit uns ist er nicht mitgekommen. Fein. Dankeschön.
Neue Fortsetzung, Frau Beckmann. Spannend, aufregend, sensationell.
Naja. Augenblick, Herr Gerke. Sagen Sie mal, Herr Gerke, haben Sie Elsäsche nicht gesehen?
Nee. Ist sie nicht gerade vom Treppe aufgelaufen?
Nee, sie ist noch nicht zu Hause.
Na, dann wird sie wohl bald kommen. Auf Wiedersehen, Frau Beckmann.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Gerke. Elsie!
powerful scene,
Yeah.
right? Anything that you noticed, anything you liked?
Well, definitely her screaming, and then it's just how like emptiness it was. Nothing. All you heard was her voice screaming for her daughter.
Right. Anything else?
You got right to the point about what the whole film is about. Didn't waste any time.
Right.
How many, like, we only 10 minutes?
Say it again?
How many minutes is it? 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not even 10 minutes in. We already catching like
Yeah.
the main focus of the plot.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
didn't feel like there was like a bunch of pointless exposition. It was just right in.
Yeah, so this film feels very contemporary, right? Like it 1931, a long time ago, right? And around the same time as The Jazz Singer, and they feel very different from each other, just in terms of the quality, in terms of the like the story, and in terms of the like the artistic expression that you're seeing. On a couple of scenes that come to mind are the shadow, where you see his shadow rather than his face, right? On top of the poster saying that there's a murderer out there, right? The ball rolling down, right? I mean, there's a lot of iconic imagery in this. This film is very influential, and in fact, I want to show you an example. Let me know if you recognize this picture. Let's see, was it 1931? Let's go with Frown. This right here. Does this look familiar?
Joker?
Yep. I think it's safe to assume that the Joker was making an homage to this.
Ah.
All right. Very good.
Wasn't he in like, he was in the whole, the little clown locker room when he was.
Yeah, when he was doing that, yeah, in the film Joker.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. All right. So what's up next here? All right, so that was M 1931. I also want to talk about diegetic and non-diegetic sounds. I know we had this conversation the last class about what's diegetic and non-diegetic. Can anyone tell me? Well, I know we talked about this last time. Can anyone tell me what the difference is? Kinsey?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Non-diegetic revolves around sound that is not coming from the movie.
Okay.
So say for instance, or is it sound?
Yeah, it can be sound or images.
Okay, so as far as what you taught, it was about images, saying for like that little chicken that popped up.
Right, the peacock, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. So yeah, how it portrayed almost like a metaphoric type deal for that thing. I can kind of relate it to like, I was trying to tie it into like Get Out. Get Out had a lot of moments where it had like non-diegetic scenes and
Interesting.
parts.
Okay, great.
As far as that, as far as the image goes, I don't know about sound as much, but I think it has to be around the same field as what.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Great job. So whenever we talk about the non-diegetic versus diegetic boundary, we're usually talking about sound. Usually, that's what we usually talk about sound. So you're right. So non-diegetic is all the sound that's not inside the movie world, right? So it's the sound that theoretically the characters are not hearing, right? Only we are hearing it. So it's the narrator, it's the soundtrack, right? These are, theoretically, these are the things that we are only hearing. The characters are not hearing this. Now, many scholars would argue with that. Many scholars have said there's no such thing as diegetic or non-diegetic. It's all diegetic, right? And many filmmakers play with this boundary of what a diegetic is and what not diegetic. Well, Kinsey, you have an example?
I had a question. So when they talk about breaking the fourth wall,
yes.
What is that? Does that relate to?
Yes, right. So you're breaking the diegesis, right? You're breaking the diegetic space.
Okay.
Yeah. You're removing it from the film world, and we're talking to the audience, right? So that's kind of a way of playing with that as well. Now there are sound scholars who argue that even the soundtrack that you're hearing still should be part of the diegetic space. Right? So, and there's many film directors that play with this idea. But so, for example, if we're talking about Blade Runner, right? The if you want to make the diegetic versus non-diegetic boundary, then you would argue that the soundtrack that you're hearing is only the audience can only hear, right? But you could also argue, no, that's actually playing in the film world. That score, that soundtrack, the characters are hearing this soundtrack in the film world, right? Now that's, that's sort of, is a debate in film theory, right?
And I've seen that happen before. Like I can relate it off the top of my head off of Guardians of the Galaxy. That little scene in I believe it was Endgame or Infinity War, where they was like playing 80s music. I don't know what the song was. Some type of music.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, they're in the ship. They're all singing the song together.
Yep, that's a great way of playing with that boundary.
Yeah, it's like in movies, like, they'll like start playing a song on something, like the video or something, and then it like transitions into another scene, but you still hear it.
Yeah.
This is my favorite example of that. There we go. Legends Battle. So the joke is that we assume it's the soundtrack, and then it turns out there's an actual live band, right? So it's playing with that boundary of what is actually part of the film world, right? Good. Another example. This one is from Baby Driver. Anyone have seen the film Baby Driver?
I have, yeah.
Filmed in Atlanta, obviously. And here is the opening sequence that you you can interpret how the film plays with the boundary between diegetic and non-diegetic. Oh, by the way, I walked downtown and I saw a bunch of film equipment everywhere. I'm assuming they kind of stopped filming because it's raining, And I saw some lights set up downtown, and I saw what was an NYPD big light rig thing, but it's labeled NYPD.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm wondering if that's a prop.
Spider-Man?
Maybe.
Perhaps. Yeah, it's a prop for Spider-Man.
Have they started filming Spider-Man?
Just a fun little. That's the only thing I saw though.
The Winter Soldier. It's not Spider-Man. They're working on Spider-Man next year.
Okay, we're going. All right, there you go. Just fun fact.
Oh, First Bank of Atlanta. Pretty sure I've walked down here.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, I got to tell you about the fabulous, most groovy Bell Bottom. Bell Bottom.
Yeah, fun way to end the class. All right, so remember the exam is live today. You can take it all the way to the weekend and on Tuesday. But that's it. I will see you. No class on Tuesday.
Okay.
No class on Tuesday, but I'll see you on Thursday. All right. Have a good one, everyone.